unsurprisingly here, the scientific method worked for scientists and gave us all of the modern marvels we have today. Turns out it actually works for startups too. And so if you hear people talk about validating and hypotheses and experimenting, they're borrowing from the scientific method, and for good reason. So let me talk about the scientific method in kind of startup terms here. So the first thing you want to have is you want to develop a hypothesis. And so take something that you think is probably true. So let's say that you are building a dating app and you think it should be for elderly people. Let's say, like I talked about in kind of the first module. Let's say that's your hypothesis. Okay, great. Interesting hypothesis. That becomes your hypothesis. How do you make an experiment to kind of go validate whether, verify and validate whether that's true or not? So you design an experiment. We have a lot of modules. We're going to cover in depth what each of these are. So I'm just hitting them at a high level, but you want to design an experiment to validate whether elderly people want a dating app or not. Okay, once you have that experiment and you run the experiment, you're going to generate some amount of data, whether that's qualitative or quantitative. And then you need to analyze that data to see whether your hypothesis is true or not true. And you want to be able to kind of come out that way. And after you do the analysis, you're going to kind of do the whole thing over again. Sometimes going back and you pick a new hypothesis and you're like, okay, cool, let me generate a new experiment on the new hypothesis. Sometimes you actually need to go back and you need to validate a deeper point in your existing hypothesis. So could be your hypothesis was, I think a dating app for elderly people would be good. Elderly people need something like this and it's harder for them to date. Okay, you create an experiment and you analyze it. Maybe let's say that the data is not as kind of clear as you would like it to be and you want to run some new experiment. Okay, you kind of go to the back, run a new experiment, and the new experiment specifically addresses kind of like maybe a different set of data that you're looking for. Or sometimes your hypothesis, you just want to get more granular. Like maybe you find out that there is appetite for a dating app for elderly people, and for some reason elderly men just like jumped out like disproportionately in the analysis that they want to kind of even more. And so you're like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. Okay, let's reform this hypothesis to be even more specific. Let's run this again specifically for men. And so you're running this loop, and this scientific method will be your tool to kind of like figure out how to answer all these questions. And so again, we're going to go in a lot more depth, but at a high level, scientific method, use this to answer all the questions you need to figure out whether your startup idea is compelling or not. Now that we've talked about the scientific method and how it applies to the validation process, let's talk about the components for running experiments. Unfortunately, there's only really 3. So the first one is generating traffic. You need to be able to get your idea in front of people. And so this could be running ads. It could be talking to people in front of kind of convenience stores. It can be any kind of things, but you just need to get in front of people that you think would be interested in your idea. Maybe let's just go back to my example of kind of like elderly kind of like dating. And so if you need to get in front of people who are elderly and potentially interested in dating, you could buy ads that are targeted towards them. I can't believe I would suggest this, but I guess you could go to kind of like retirement kind of like centers in some of these places. And if you're in Singapore, definitely hawker centers at certain times. There's a lot of elderly people, but you basically just want to be able to get in front of people who might want your product. And so if you're running this experiment, so first component, generate traffic, got to get in front of people. Second component here is you need to be able to communicate your idea. So great, you got in front of the uncle or auntie or whoever elderly person. You want to be able to communicate your idea to them. And so you want to be able to talk about what does your kind of like app potentially do? What is the problem you want to solve? And so you want to be able to communicate. So you want to get in front of people. Once you get in front of people, communicate your idea to them. The third and final component here is you want to be able to measure their interest. And so you just got in front of them, you communicated your idea. You want to get a sense of how interested are they in what you are talking about and what your idea is. And you can do all 3 of these pieces, then you have a pretty good experiment kind of ready and baked. And so you need these 3 components to run a good experiment. You need to be able to generate traffic, you need to be able to communicate your idea, and then you need to be able to measure interest. So there's only 3, but they're all really important. I know I went over those kind of like quickly. We have modules for each of these components. We're going to go super deep into each of them. And so if you have lots of questions about kind of each of these, just wait for the next kind of couple modules. We'll answer all of your questions related to them. But I just wanted to give people a sense of like, okay, we talked about the scientific method as a process. When you run experiments, what are kind of the different components of it? And so we want to give people a sense of that.